Hello? Oh, I forgot water. I always forget something. That's alright. Nobody's gonna be here for a little bit. As usual. This is our first stream in a while, also. I have been out of town. I shall return with a water. Where Eddie at? I'm back. What's up, Momo? Welcome to the stream. Welcome to our first stream in a good hot minute. Adjust my lighting a little bit. CIA got Eddie? Yeah, they got me. Cough, not COVID, right, Eddie? No way. I'm immune. Hello, Comrade Eddie. Pretty late night for a stream. It is, but, and I'm tired. But I was gone out of town in Oklahoma. I gotta undo this top button. I'm choking. Gone in Oklahoma for, how many days was I gone? Like 4 or 5 days. So I haven't been able to stream in like 6 days. And then I had a family event tonight. But I wasn't gonna go to bed without doing a stream because it's been too long. And I told y'all I'm gonna stay consistent, so I'm not letting a week go by where we don't stream. That's my duty to the YouTube and Twitch proletariat. What up, Eddie? How you doing? Good, Momo. How are you? Nice to meet you, Tired. Ah. Epic sick joke. That's me dapping you up. Sup, fellas? What's up, unelectable airwaves? Glad you're here. How was your day? How's the Masters going? My day was good. I'm tired as crap. Yeah, I slept in this morning, but last week was one of those weeks where it didn't matter how much I slept in, I was still gonna be tired. Like, I feel like I'm jet lagged. One of those weeks where I was like, driving a van full of people, from place to place late at night, and having to stay up late. So tired, and had to wrestle a lot and coach a lot and yell a lot. So happy 65. Long time no see. Hello, Eddie and everyone. Eddie, I've been watching the State and Revolution YouTube videos. I'm almost done reading it. And your videos are definitely helping me understand the entire book. Question regarding the reading. How do you manage to retain information, what you read? I have a little trouble retaining what I read, which sometimes impacts what I've memorized. Yeah, I mean, the best way to retain it is to apply it and then to teach it, I would say. Like, the thing that really helped me solidify the knowledge in that book, State and Revolution, was actually doing the reading guide for State and Revolution, which, every communist theorist, or even the idea of the dialectic, is that you go from theory to practice and then back to theory. You know, so you read State and Revolution, maybe watch my guide, and then take it into practice. Try and explain it to someone. And through teaching it, you'll learn it a lot better. And through conversation and discussing it with other people, you'll learn it a lot better. Reread content, contemplate it. Yes, that's a good idea too. Like to sit and think about what you're reading. And with State and Revolution, you can think about how it can be applied today. What is this here? What do we got here? Someone sent us this TikTok. Who sent us this? El Boopus.
Yeah, boy.
Sorry, I just realized my microphone was muted. Thank you for the follow. First follow in 6 days. It's our first stream in 6 or 7 days. But thank you. This video is hilarious. I'm definitely giving a picture of young Stalin the next time, or to my barber. The next time I go get a haircut. My barber watches my videos, by the way. She's aware of the TikTok account at least. I don't know about YouTube and whatever, but she's glad that she can help by cutting my hair, you know, making me look good. Yo, Eddie, mutual me, comrade. Oh, that's you. Haha, El Boopus. Okay. I don't have my. Oh. No, I do have my phone. I thought I didn't have my phone. I'm not logged into my TikTok account on my computer right now. L underscore Boopus. Follow back. Boom. I've needed some more people to follow on TikTok, obviously. Since my account got banned, I lost all my mutuals, including Mia Khalifa and a bunch of different musical artists that I actually listen to. I coached 4 soccer games today. It wasn't too bad, though. That sounds like a grind, though. 4 games in a day? That's a lot. Especially for soccer, if you gotta, like, be calling out plays and subbing people in and whatever. I don't know. I'm not that well versed in soccer. I watch the World Cup every 4 years. Till America loses in the first or second round. Actually, no, I watched through that. I don't even watch America anymore. America celebrates when they beat, like, Ghana in Africa. It's, you know, incredibly small country. And they usually lose to Ghana. I just bought my copies of the German Ideologies, State and Revolution, and Capital Volume 2. I haven't been able to read them yet, but I'm looking forward to it. Nice. Sounds like you are advancing to level 2 of of theory. A lot of those books are usually ones you go to after you've finished a few. Especially Capital Volume 2. That means you probably finished Capital Volume 1. Thank you for the follow, Ace GQ. Eddie, what do you think about the Instagram page Christian Marxism? I don't know anything about the Instagram page. I think Christianity has a ton of overlap with Marxism, though. What do we got here? Comrade E, this is one of my mutuals. Did Comrade E himself send this? No, happy 5. Yeah, I've seen this meme format, and I think this is probably my favorite one so far. This is the one that I agree with the most. Let's go through this again. Lenin is the principal, fair. Stalin is the assistant principal for sure. Luxembourg doing social studies, I like it. Parenti is the guidance counselor. That's just funny. Agreed. Mao creative writing for sure. Mao's poetry is supposedly really good. I haven't read it a lot, but just the way that Mao writes about dialectics and contradictions and even just China and economic construction and consolidating the people and serving the people, it's all really well written and creative and fun to read. I just finished that today. Finished Mao's on quotation. And Stalin's a very straightforward writer, which is why he should be the assistant principal and he can, root out anything bad in the party or the school. But Mao doing creative writing would be great. He could also do physical education. For those who don't know, Mao wrote a piece called On Physical Education, where he applied Marxism and dialectical materialism to fire. Thank you, Pink Ranger 89, for resubscribing for 2 months. Cheers from Minnesota's Iron Range. Cheers, comrade. Thank you. Thank you so much for your support. I really appreciate that. We got an Iron Ranger here in the chat. What's up from Duluth? I've been to Duluth. Midwest, baby. Midwest. Okay, so we gotta keep going through this. The school mascots. I guess that part doesn't really make sense. The mascot doesn't write the foundational text that the school is based upon, though. So, but I guess they are the OGs. But I was actually my mascot in high school. I quit football after I played my freshman year and was okay. I started on the freshman team. But then I quit to focus on wrestling, and they were like, "Do you want to be the mascot and run around in this eagle costume while our team, who's terrible, loses 50-14?" And I was like, "Yes," and that's what I did. Midwest is best, yeah, baby. Midwest. You see that G is a huge hockey fan? I did not, but G's been to Iowa. Alright. I like it, Comrade E. Comrade E's a good guy, too. Good comrade. What else do we got here? Demonstrations in Ecuador. Let me try and get the sound on here. This right-wing Now, I'm not positive, but is Ecuador not the place where they had a socialist who almost won, but there was like an eco-socialist / more liberal candidate who was backed by the US who split the vote? Is that not what happened in Ecuador? Let's see here. I may be thinking of somewhere else, but I thought this was Ecuador. So Guillermo Lasso beat Andres Arauz, who's part of the Union for Hope, which is left wing or Democratic Center. Where were the primary elections? So first round. Oh, not opinion polls. Ex-President Rafael Correa's citizens movement and breakaway. So this is the left winger. Rafael Correa was socialist. In Ecuador. This is the right winger. And then Unity Movement, molecular biologist, offered after being reluctant. He states he's from the ecological left that... Oh, sorry, I need to open up. I need to switch the screen. My bad. So this is Andres Arauz, the Correa-associated candidate, socialist candidate, who was criticized by this candidate for being too productivist. You know, and some people, you know, said that this candidate was like more liberal, mostly focusing on like ecology and eco-socialism, and they proposed a ban on all mining activity to limit oil extraction, stuff like that, which is like, you know, I understand the need, you know, to move away from fossil fuels, but stuff like this is not socialism, right? Marx and all the socialist thinkers are very clear. We increase the productive forces, especially, you know, in countries who have been subjected to imperialism, right? In countries who have been prevented from increasing their productive forces, and increasing their productive output. You know, so this would really be shooting Ecuador in the foot to ban all mining activity. And I believe, and he also suggested UBI, which again, not even close to a Marxist socialist policy, right? UBI was first proposed by Milton Friedman. You know, he called it a negative tax. He said that, you know, capitalism is the best thing ever, but if we do, you know, trickle down, top down economics for too long, you know, eventually people will run out of money to pay the rich. So the government should give them a universal basic income, a negative tax, so they can buy more stuff and keep consumerism and capitalism going longer. It's a band-aid that keeps capitalism going. So you can see why the US backed this guy. And tried to split the vote here, which, you know, ultimately helped Guillermo Lasso win. Interesting though that these protests are going on. Shows that people in Ecuador are not satisfied with the current Guillermo Lasso government. I should also look up the article that says that the U.S. backed that guy. It was from Gray Zone, so I know a bunch of people will be mad at me for using the Gray Zone as a source. But yeah, so the U.S. government also cultivated like environmental and indigenous groups to back, you know, their preferred candidate. So weaponizing, you know, the indigenous struggle and weaponizing the struggle of oppressed people and oppressed social groups to try and allow a right-wing, authoritarian, anti-indigenous president to be the president of Ecuador. So, you know, this just shows like why you can't can't trust the US, and you have to look at things deeper than the surface. Right? You can't just look at things by their appearance as they appear. You can't, because, you know, you might be like, "Oh, the indigenous eco-socialist. Yeah, I support him." You know, but look a little deeper. Is he supporting policies proposed by Milton Friedman and anti-socialist, anti-Marxist policies, while being backed by the U.S., who are cultivating, you know, various NGOs in this country to support this person and split the vote and allow a right winger to win? You know, you gotta look at things in their context. You gotta look at things deeper than the surface. So that was a really interesting story. I've been wanting to talk about that forever, so I'm glad that you sent that tweet, so that I could cover that. It's a really interesting form of imperialism. Boric in Chile, yeah, screw that guy. Eddie, you peeping the Colombian election? It's tomorrow, I think. Oh yeah, we've been following it. Lots of groups in DC today for the Poor People's Campaign. That's cool. Love Gray Zone, me too. So many Westerns in these AstroTurf to ban all mining protests. Yeah, right. NED has a searchable database on their site. They really. Lasso is aft. He has 16% approval, 82 opposes government after only a year in power. Jeez. You see what Boric is doing in Chile? Yes. We tweeted about it also. But Milton Friedman is a socialist. Yeah, on God. That's facts and no cap. Boric uses opportunity on the world stage to trash Cuba and Venezuela. Yeah, I guess we should go into that then. If people don't know what we're talking about, that conference, that imperialist conference that Biden went and had in Latin America, and Nancy Pelosi and whoever else, the socialist, the real socialist countries boycotted it. Cuba and Venezuela, and were there other? I can't remember exactly which countries boycotted it. But Gabriel Boric went and voiced support and, threw shade at Cuba and Venezuela. Yeah, and that's what right wingers do. Wow, the stream looked like it just glitched for me. I don't know about for you guys. Maybe it was just my computer. I know I've suggested this video multiple times in the past, but here's part 1 of Cold War Oversimplified. Yes, I got you. What are your feelings on Jimmy Dore planning on running? Alright, I'm going to watch this video and answer this question, but I went to get water before, and I only took a sip of water, and I forgot to bring a cup up here with me. My mouth is so dry. I'll be back. Alright, we back. Can't hear me? What? You got kicked and now there's no sound? That's not ideal for me. Not ideal. Alright, I'm gonna have to look up my own Twitch. Still not working? Hello? Ooh. Can you hear me now? Okay. Sounds good. Looks like we got it going again. Hopefully we didn't lose all our viewers. Probably did, but that's alright. Thank you for sticking with us. What do I think about Jimmy Dore for president? I would definitely vote for him and support him. I mean, people were saying, like, if Jimmy runs and he loses, it'll prove that electoral politics will never work once and for all. And it's like, well, I mean, I feel like that's already been proven. Like, I don't know exactly what this is going to do. And if Jimmy even gets in office, like, what that would do. But I think it would be a good chance to expose people to socialism. Like, that's what the Bernie campaign was for me, but ultimately, like, as someone who worked for the campaign, all we were doing were knocking on, like, upper middle class Democrats' houses. We literally, had an app with a map on it that would show us the houses to go door knock at and talk to people about socialism. And we would be in like these rich neighborhoods, and then we'd be like, all right, we're going to go to a trailer park. And the campaign staff would be like, no, don't go to that trailer park. Go to this neighborhood, this gated community where there's 12 registered Democrats. And we're like, no. And we just go to the trailer park. And they had us, every day it was canvassing on campuses, college campuses too, which, and then we tried to hit a third college campus, and they wouldn't let us. They wouldn't let us organize this camp. It was so silly. And yeah. But the Jimmy Dore campaign, sorry, I got sidetracked. The Jimmy Dore campaign would be another chance to talk to people about socialism. And he would take a more staunch anti-imperialist stance than Bernie. He would call out the Democrats way more than Bernie. He would criticize AOC and the other so-called socialists way more than Bernie. So, my grandma used to work for Pinochet and to this day supported him. That's too bad. Well, at least you can flip the script then, you know. Her descendants are supporting socialism and the good side that fought against Pinochet and was murdered by Pinochet. So, Eddie, I have a bunch of lib friends in Minnesota. Don't believe me when I talk about positive things with Cuba. They definitely take U.S. propaganda at their word. How would you suggest I change their minds? Well, you got to have a deep understanding of Cuba, you know, and you have to be able to combat their arguments. Like, it depends on what they're saying about Cuba. You know, you have to... But ultimately, you know, I guess some points you can make are, like, Cuba had basically slavery. You know, plantations that were very similar to slave plantations prior to the revolution. And those were, you know, fully backed and supported and going to enrich Western capitalists. And not only that, you know, Havana, Cuba was used as a brothel, you know, and is a place where the capitalists would go and engage in decadency and do drugs and get drunk and sleep with prostitutes and traffic women. And then after the revolution, that all went away, and then the capitalists were forced to go to Las Vegas, Nevada. That is why a major part of the reason that Las Vegas became what it is today is because after the Cuban Revolution, a lot of the capitalists hightailed it out of Havana and went to Las Vegas, and Las Vegas became the party spot rather than Havana. And now Cuba has a lung vaccine. Cuba has abolished illiteracy. Cuba has universal health care. I wrote a essay about the American healthcare system for my healthcare administration master's program. And I got close to a perfect score by saying, you know, basically the U.S. should follow Cuba's path. The U.S. needs to launch the same programs that Cuba and Venezuela have launched to build hospitals and to train doctors and to reach rural areas, especially. You know, in the U.S., I compared them in this essay, the U.S. to Cuba. There were 100 rural healthcare facilities that left within like the last few years because it was unprofitable, because they weren't making enough money off of giving people in rural areas healthcare. Versus in Cuba and Venezuela, they've been consistently expanding, you know, rural healthcare, as have countries like Vietnam, China. Every socialist country has done this because that's a consistent problem, obviously, getting development and healthcare to rural areas. But in the U.S., the wealthiest country on earth, hospitals are up and leaving because they're not making enough money off of selling healthcare in our corrupt for-profit healthcare system. Versus in Cuba, you know, the government is launching these campaigns to bring people healthcare in rural areas. So, I mean, there are just some examples of things you can say to your friends who don't like Cuba. Even Eisenhower admitted Batista was a piece of shit. That's funny. I didn't know that. By the way, before I get into this this Cold War oversimplified video, me and my buddy started a semi-infrequent, like, but MMA podcast. It'll be somewhat frequent. We'll post, you know, whenever there's a big fight card, or any fight card really, because we just talk about MMA anyway, so we figure we might as well sit down and record each other. So if you're into MMA, it's called Midwest Martial Arts. There's me and him. And I talk about capitalism all the time, obviously, because it's me, and I'm talking about what I think. So I'm going to talk about how capitalism morphs the UFC, and I give a Marxist analysis of the UFC and specific events that go down in the UFC. So I know there's a lot of socialists who are into MMA, and watch the UFC. So if you're into that, there you go. But let's watch the Cold War oversimplified. Did you see what happened between China and Canada? I did not. You can let me know though. But for the time being, I want to watch this video.
That in order to sell more merch, I should do a face reveal wearing some of it. So are you ready? Here we go. Boom. New minimalist and Cold War merch available now, and get the new limited edition Churchill character pin before it sells out, with more characters coming in the future. Link in the description down below. The year is 1917. Fighting rages on the Eastern Front of the First World War. Both Germany and Russia are on the brink of collapse. Soldier, I need you to bring me this man. Got it. Found him, sir. What? No, not Lenin. Lenin, the Russian communist. What? Why would I need a beetle? Lenin, the Russian communist. He was exiled to Switzerland. You know what? I'll do it myself. Who wants to start a revolution?
I needed to overcome emotional eating and stress eating. I started using Able, and so far I've lost 30 pounds.
So far.
Able uses
Very strange. I have nothing to say. And by the way, J Benavidez 04, I did actually see what happened between the Canada and China. I lied. Now that you send this, I did actually see this. China fighter pilots raise middle finger at Canada Air Force crew. That'll teach him. That was pretty funny. And then, the West is like, oh, how could the Chinese fighter pilots do this? They hate us. How could they hate us? It's like, yeah, the people in the East have no reason to hate you guys. Putting economic sanctions on them and always threatening to overthrow them and calling them a dictatorship and colonizing their neighbors for years.
The Germans put Lenin on a train and sent him all the way back to Russia, hoping he and his mates would create an internal crisis. And create an internal crisis they did. The government was overthrown, and Lenin was in charge. He immediately pulled out of the First World War, made the country communist, started a 3-year-long civil war, got shot, broke the economy, caused a famine, and then he died. On his deathbed he said, "Hey man."
He broke the economy? What does that even mean? The first years of the USSR have got to be like some of the fastest increases in living standards in human history. Illiteracy went from 17% to 99% in a matter of years. They collectivized agriculture. I mean, I suppose he's talking about the collectivization process. But because people did die of famine, but people were dying of famine, of course, beforehand. But how can you possibly describe the process of the collectivization of agriculture as breaking the economy? Because ultimately, that's what made it so there weren't any famines anymore. They collectivized and industrialized their agriculture, and then they could feed everybody. Versus previously, there were famines because you had capitalist agriculture, or actually peasant agriculture, where peasants were just, working the land of their massive landlords. And if there wasn't enough food produced for everyone, well, too bad. A bunch of people died, and then you just move on with life. But the USSR ended that because of Lenin. But apparently that's breaking the economy. That's economics. Communists and Lenin just don't understand it.
Man, tell whoever's in charge of giving people jobs not to let that jerk Stalin become the next leader. By the way, who did I put in charge of giving people jobs? That was...
See how incoherent this propaganda point is? Like, when Lenin gave this, supposedly said, don't put Stalin in charge. It was on the testimony of this person who was in there with him. And then Lenin had just had a stroke. He literally just had a stroke. And you can see, even in this video, how ridiculous that propaganda point is, because Lenin's like, who did I put in charge of putting people in charge? And this guy's like, Stalin, sir. It's like, yeah, because Lenin supported Stalin. He thought Stalin was a good leader. He thought Stalin was a good revolutionary. He thought he was a smart guy and of the working class and loyal to the working class.
would be Stalin, sir. Ugh. Stalin was a rising force in the Communist Party. He still had some opponents, but conveniently, all of them were arrested or disappeared. So that was lucky. And so Stalin took over. He implemented
The nice thing about this being oversimplified is he doesn't have to go into any detail or defend anything he says. He can just rapid fire propaganda points until the Cold War's over and blame the USSR for everything. Maybe he'll also throw shade at America. It would be easy to do so. If he doesn't throw any shade at America and paints them as the good guys, it's like, come on. This isn't the 1980s anymore. Get a little smarter with your propaganda.
his 5-year plans, which transformed the country from an agriculture-based economy to an industrial one. And like Lenin before him, he reigned with terror. Anyone
Dude, I'm gonna have to stop this video every 2 seconds. And he moved it from an agriculture-based economy to an industrial-based one? No, he industrialized agriculture, meaning instead of having peasant farmers, they had tractors and industrial machines working the agriculture so they could produce vastly more and prevent famines from happening. But that's not, I mean, yeah, that is an industrialized economy, but they didn't move away from agriculture. They massively increased agriculture. And Stalin wrote about massively increasing agriculture. And they didn't move from an agricultural society to an industrial society. They moved from a feudal society, a semi-feudal society at least, to a fully industrialized modern economy. Because they had feudalism prior to the communist revolution. They had peasants who worked the land of giant feudal lords or landlords or landowners, basically. Just landlords at that time, basically, in Russia, I believe. But in China at this time, they still had, like, basically feudal lords. And there was a monarchy, right? They were run by the Tsar. So it was a feudal system, and they still had agriculture. They actually had more agriculture after they moved away from that. It was just way better agriculture.
who dared criticize or oppose him would either be killed or left to rot in the horrendous Soviet work camps. Then a short man with a silly mustache tried to take over the world, punched the Russians all the way to Moscow, and then the Russians, with some help from their faithful ally, the Winter, punched them all the way back to Berlin. At this point,
That's why it happened. The Winter. I love how the West can't give the Soviet Union anything. You know, the Soviet Union went from this feudal country who would have been absolutely mollywopped by the Germans, if not sided with the Germans. You know, who knows what the Tsar would have done if they still had a monarchy when World War II went down. But instead, they industrialized their country using economic planning, and they implemented these ingenious, like, tank building policies. And, you know, the people sacrificed greatly by working hard to industrialize while having to invest like 30 to 50% of their budget into military spending because they were being invaded by the Western powers, the US and the UK at first, and other Western powers, but then, you know, preparing for the German invasion with Hitler. And then the Soviets inflicted 80% of German casualties. 80%. And knocked the Germans back and forced them to fight a war on 2 fronts. But yeah, it was all because of the Winter, you know, because Germans are they just really hate the snow, so they didn't want to go into Siberia. You know, it had nothing to do with the fact that the Soviets were murking millions of them. And 22 million Soviet people lost their lives in that struggle. So don't freaking tell me that it was the Winter that stopped Hitler. It was the Soviets, the communists.
being allies, America, the UK, and the Soviet Union were good chums.
I just noticed how many views this has. What the hell? 49 million views? No. I dislike very much.
They held a couple of conferences near the end of the war to decide what would happen next. Hey, Stalin, after all your trials and tribulation, you must be pretty happy to be standing here in Berlin. Tsar Alexander made it all the way to Paris. Hey, just give me a second. Hey, man, I think something's up with Stalin. I know, right? What should we do? Shall I tell him about the bomb? Yeah, tell him about the bomb. That will scare him. So, we got this crazy new big A-bomb that can destroy an entire city in one go. Yes, my spies told me already. Oh, wait.
I love also, like, now that I'm reading Stalin, I just happen to be reading Stalin lately, like, this is super apparent to me. Like, Western historians will never actually quote what he wrote, because what he wrote was really smart, and showed that he was a rational person, and in many, 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 many cases shows that he was trying to help his people. That he was trying to construct socialism, which we know, after the USSR fell and all their documents were released, their internal documents, the CIA thought they were going to find, Stalin was secretly a madman, and they were going to find out what his actual motivations were. And they said, his motivations were he was a communist, a socialist. He was trying to construct socialism. He was a genuine person, which is what his writings show. But, instead they're like, this is what FDR said to Churchill about Stalin. Stalin said he was going to take over the whole world. Oh, well, if a U.S. president said it, it's got to be true. Like, come on. Read Dialectical and Historical Materialism. Oversimplified. It's not even that long.
I meant to act surprised. Wow, that's amazing. He already knew. How? Am I sure I want to send nuclear secrets via unsecure public coffee shop Wi-Fi? Am I ever? Dude, use a VPN. And speaking of VPNs, if, like me, you take internet safety seriously, then you need NordVPN. NordVPN hides your online activity, keeping your service provider selling your and securely. And it's simple. You wanted to watch a certain oversimplifyvpn.com/open description box down below. America dropped their big A-bomb. Does the A stand for atomic or ass? Then
Okay, that was a sick joke by Stalin.
America dropped their big A-bomb on Japan, and World War II officially came to an end. Hooray!
Hold on. We might have a good part of this video. Are they saying that the Americans dropped the atomic bomb on bombs on Hiroshima, and Nagasaki because they wanted to threaten the Soviets and threaten Stalin? Are they admitting that? That's great when Americans can admit that. I have made multiple TikToks saying that. Like, the first time I made a TikTok about it, I was just talking about it, right? Like, oh, there was no reason to do this. Japan was already going to surrender. And the U.S., though, was turning their attention towards Stalin, as this video just said, and the Soviet Union. And they dropped the atomic weapons on Japan in order to threaten the Soviet Union and show off their new capability, and also show off the fact that they were willing to kill tens of thousands of civilians in order to protect their interests, which they've shown time and time again, of course, since then. But if you say this on TikTok, people freak out. People lose their minds. Like, I got ratioed by, at least with one video, of someone saying, no, this was some Japanese writer said this was a war like no other, and Japan was going to fight to the last man. It's like, no, they weren't. The documents show that they were going to surrender, and, there's no way you can convince an entire country of people, like, to fight to the last man when they could just surrender and have peace. And unless it's the DPRK, they just, stay fighting imperialism and demanding their independence. But they're under extreme horrific oppression, or they have been, in warfare from the U.S. But I digress. But, after I made that original TikTok, I just kept making that argument. I kept making a bunch of videos because it was, one, the videos would get a lot of views, and then it was just fascinating to me at that point to see how enraged people would get. And then once I kept saying it, they're like, you're still not getting it. Japanese people are actually just crazy, and they would have continued to fight until they were all dead with sticks and stones. People are literally saying stuff like this. I'm like, okay, guys, I get it now. You're all racist, imperialist, chauvinists. I made a video on TikTok and a bunch of people call me a tanky and imperial Jap. Yes, I forgot. Thank you for bringing that up because that's the other thing that happened. Everyone's like, are we supporting Imperial Japan now? I'm like, I just said that a bunch of civilians shouldn't have gotten nuked. Like, that destroys farmland and infrastructure, and, the place is still filled with toxic radiation and waste. Like, it has nothing to do with supporting Imperial Japan. And I'm a communist. Yeah, I support Imperial Japan. Like, get your heads out of your ass. The stuff that people will say if you talk about, if you say that dropping atomic weapons on Japan was unjustified, they will lose their minds.
Hey, we won. Okay, so now it's time to establish the New World Order. Stalin, you're in charge of Eastern Europe. Now, we want you to let them all hold elections. Oh yes, of course, elections. And these elections will be free in of Eastern Europe. Now, okay, so now it's time for their big A-bomb on Japan, and World War II officially came to an end. Hooray, we won. Okay, so now it's time to establish the New World Order.
Nope, I was wrong. I was totally wrong. This is the worst video I've ever seen in my life. I want to burn it. I want to stomp on my computer. They said that World War II came to an end officially with the atomic bombs. Like, that was what ended it. I hate you! I hate this video! Sometimes it's hard not to hate America as a whole.
Order. Stalin, you're in charge of Eastern Europe. Now, we want you to let them all hold elections. Oh yes, of course, elections. And these elections will be free and fair, right? Oh yes, certainly, free and fair. Definitely.
Oh yes, certainly, free and fair. Just like the US elections, 93% of which are decided by the candidate who raises the most money from billionaire lobbyists. Free and fair.
Free and fair. Communist, 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 communist. If that's not free and fair, I don't know what is. Throughout Eastern Europe, Soviet puppet governments were established as a buffer zone between the USSR and the West, with Churchill proclaiming an Iron Curtain had descended across the continent. The relationship between the old allies was deteriorating fast. Over the next few years, the British intervened.
It's so funny how capitalist propaganda is always just projection. Imperialist propaganda.
Allies was deteriorating fast. Over the next few years,
like they're saying, Stalin created a buffer zone here by implementing dictatorships. No, these places did have democratic elections. They were democratically elected, and at this time, socialism was showing to be the most rational and best economic system on the planet. The Soviet Union had turned themselves from a backward feudal, monarchy to a powerful industrial superpower that defeated the Nazis, and they did it within a matter of years. Versus the West, created military alliances like NATO and created the UN, which I'm sure they're going to talk about next, but forged ties with countries in Western Europe to create a buffer zone, to create, a way to attack the Soviet Union. And since the dissolution of the Soviet Union, they've continued to expand NATO towards Russia's borders, as Russia is continually going against U.S. interests. So, it's the capitalist imperialists who created a buffer zone versus these countries were trying to work on construction. They were trying to industrialize. They were trying to build up their productive base. But that's what the U.S. can't have. They can't have socialism being successful. They can't have global competitors. They can't have countries they're trying to imperialize and exploit, bring themselves out of poverty. They can't have competitors on the global market, which is why, this country here, Yugoslavia, the U.S. helped dismember and destroyed with bombs, destroyed their infrastructure, destroyed 167 public-owned factories so they wouldn't be competitors on the global market with U.S. transnational firms. But yes, it was the Soviet Union creating a buffer zone, and using or doing imperialism. Forget the fact that the U.S., dumped a bunch of money and loans and created the IMF and World Bank after World War II as well as created the U.S. Special Forces, all these imperialist apparatuses, but then used them to give very good 4% interest loans to Western Europe so they could rebuild themselves after the war. So the U.S. would have a military and economic buffer between themselves and the Soviets. It's all freaking projection.
years, the British intervened in the Greek Civil War to prevent a communist takeover. In Turkey, the Russians began demanding more control of Turkey's sea axis. The British intervened in the Greek Civil War to prevent a communist takeover.
They had to prevent a communist takeover. And when the West is being imperialist, they're preventing a communist takeover. But when communist governments are democratically elected in Eastern Europe, that's Soviet imperialism. This is your mind on American propaganda.
In Turkey, the Russians began demanding more control of Turkey's sea axis routes, which prompted the US to send their largest battleship to Turkey for a friendly visit. After World War II, Iran was now occupied by both the Soviets and the British, with an agreement to both pull out once the war was over. The British pulled out. Stalin was like, you know what? I think I might stick around. All in favor of kicking Russia out of Iran? You want to know something? You guys suck. Pressure from the UN forced the Soviets to leave, and with the establishment of NATO, the Soviets had no doubt that the West was Soviets to leave, and with the establishment of NATO,
so these communist states who had their own governments and own democratically elected governments and made their own decisions separate from the Soviet Union in Eastern Europe were Soviet buffer states that Stalin took over. But NATO is established. This is just a military alliance. This isn't the US creating buffer states and arming and funding a bunch, every country at the Soviets' borders. Don't call that buffer states.
the Soviets had no doubt that the West was out to encircle and destroy them. And America announced the Truman Doctrine, in which they basically said, those guys are not cool, cannot be trusted, and we will do everything we can to prevent the spread of communism around the world. Many view this moment as the official declaration of the Cold War.
Join large-scale battles with military vehicles.
So who's the aggressors here? The U.S. is literally encircling them with a military alliance and forcing them out of Iran, where the U.S. is about to do a coup and overthrow the democratically elected Mohammad Mossadegh. And then they release the Truman Doctrine, which says we'll do literally anything to stop the Soviets from spreading their political and economic ideology. Because we have to spread capitalism, because we get to do that, I guess. You know, because if we decide that it's superior as the great Western Empire, then it is superior, and we can kill as many people as we want, overthrow as many governments as we want in order to enforce that. Like, how do people see this and go along with this narrative and think this makes sense? Like, yes, surely the U.S. needed to expand NATO all the way to Russia's borders and, you know, do a coup in Iran and kill all these people and all these anti-communist interventions like the Vietnam War around the world and destroy and bomb infrastructure to stop the spread of communism, where the Soviet Union just industrialized their country and taught everybody to read and gave everyone universal health care. That's authoritarian, totalitarianism.
In Europe, everyone was living in a post-apocalyptic void brought on by the Second World War. Cities reduced to rubble, not enough food. It was terrible. This is great. The more they suffered, the more likely it is they'll turn to communism. Dude, you're really messed up. What's wrong with you? My father used to punish me severely. America realized what was going on and quit communism. Food, it was terrible. In Europe, everyone was living in a post-apocalyptic void brought on by the Second World War. Cities reduced to around the world. Many view this moment as the official declaration of the Cold War. Back in Europe, everyone was living in a post-apocalyptic void brought on...
I was trying to find whether he said Western or Eastern Europe, but he just says all of Europe was a post-apocalyptic void brought on by the Second World War. I guess a lot of their infrastructure was destroyed in all the areas, including, obviously, the Soviet Union had tons of their infrastructure destroyed, so that's a fair description, actually. Not a post-apocalyptic void. And you know, a lot of countries recovered faster than others, and the Western European countries wouldn't have recovered so fast because capitalism isn't as good at recovering as socialism if it wasn't for the U.S. loans. But I'm sure that's what they're about to talk about, I hope.
By the Second World War. Cities reduced to rubble, not enough food. It was terrible. This is great. The more they suffered, the more likely it is they'll turn to communism. Dude, you're really messed up. What's wrong with you? My father used to punish me severely. America realized what was going on.
I mean, the more that capitalist countries realize that capitalism sucks, yeah, the more likely they are to turn to socialism, a system that doesn't suck.
And quickly made a move. Under the Marshall Plan, they sent $12 billion to Western Europe for its economic recovery. The countries
Called it!
of Stalin's Eastern Bloc looked on with envy. Hey, Czechoslovakia, you want to come get some economic aid? Yeah, but I have to check with my mom first. Sorry, America. I can't come. This was a full-on economic
Hell yeah, show solidarity, Czechoslovakia.
battle raging between capitalism and communism in Europe. If the Western nations developed faster and better than the East, that would be a defeat for Stalin. So he
And the East was able to develop at a similar level using economic planning and, you know, in many, many, many ways outperformed the West. You know, and we've looked at videos comparing Eastern and Western Germany and you know, how by many metrics, the East German economy was superior. But with way less resources and under, you know, economic embargoes encircled by NATO, you know, these countries were able to perform that well versus these Western countries who the U.S. was just dumping money into, and the IMF and World Bank were just dumping free money into to rebuild themselves. And the U.S. had no damage done to their infrastructure, obviously, during World War II, which is what allowed them to become the main world superpower. But, you know, this shows that socialism as an economic system was able to outperform capitalism, even when capitalism was starting from a wealthier point, was having money funneled into it. So it was capitalism artificially being propped up. And a lot of these European countries created welfare states, you know, to try and treat their workers better so their workers wouldn't demand communism. Which is why, you know, there's like the NHS in the UK now. But we got none of that in the US. I just want healthcare, please.
He set up his own rival economic recovery plan, which he called Comecon, and he also set up Common Form, which gave him more political control over the Eastern Bloc. But nowhere did this economic battle rage harder than in the city of Berlin. Caught over 100 miles behind Soviet lines, the city had been divided up between the Allies, and the western segments were still under Western control. East Berliners could travel freely to...
The Westerners were occupying it and refusing to leave, even though everyone in Germany and everyone in Berlin wanted them to leave.
West Berlin, see the economic prosperity and think, maybe this communism thing ain't so great after all. I'm gonna have fun tonight. You're home late. Oh, Stalin. I was just out with my friends. Friends? You stink of capitalism! You're out engaging in imperialist debauchery again! I swear, Ivan, I can't keep doing this. Stalin wanted the West out, so he said, hey, guess what? I'm blockading all of your supplies.
Stalin and all of East Germany and Berlin wanted the West out. And, like, you know, yeah, I'm not defending, like, the Stasi, and it sucks that, you know, authoritarian things did happen in East Germany for sure. You know, they were definitely spying on people. The Stasi, the secret police. But, like, the U.S. was occupying part of Berlin, and they were constantly trying to destabilize and overthrow the country. So they didn't, you know, they needed something to combat that. It was just the communist response to the CIA. But of course they're not going to talk about that or the imperialistic efforts of the West. They're just going to say, you know, everyone in East Germany hated Stalin because communism. So he spied on them using the Stasi, who actually weren't even connected to Stalin and would not have even reported to him. I don't get why they act like Stalin also dominated the East European communist countries, because these countries were extremely independent and in many ways would like disagree with Stalin on stuff.
Supply routes to West Berlin. What are you going to do about it? I suppose.
Especially Yugoslavia. They're saying like Yugoslavia is a socialist satellite state. Like they had like a totally different style of socialism, and they did things with their economy that Stalin criticized. It's like, this just rots people's brains, man. Like, I think we should honestly stop this video. But, like, it's hard to watch that stuff. Like, that makes kids dumb. Like, kids like me who are interested in history and want to learn stuff and are, you know, naturally curious, go on YouTube and they look up, you know, what was the Cold War? And they see that. And not only is it wrong, it's factually wrong, it's materially wrong in what they're saying happened. There's, blatant lies in there. But also it's just oversimplified. Like, this isn't how history works. It's not just Joseph Stalin was running not only the Soviet Union, but all of these East European countries by himself and making all the decisions. It's not even physically, humanly possible. Like, what are you even talking about? So it gets people to think about things so simplistically, and it's like, you know, it places a moral judgment and a moral assessment on everything. The West is morally superior and good. The liberal democracies are morally superior and good. And the East are bad totalitarian dictatorships, and they're wrong. They're morally bad. And the Stasi and the KGB are morally bad. And it's like, okay, sure, maybe by your personal morality, the Stasi and the KGB are bad. That makes sense to me. They did some authoritarian bad things that we don't want to see repeated in the future. But can we not at least understand that those were a response to the CIA? Can we not at least acknowledge that the West invaded the Soviet Union right after the revolution and tried to overthrow the revolution? Or that the West was encircling the Soviet Union with NATO and threatening them when they dropped atomic weapons on Japan? Like, can we not acknowledge there was a reason that the Stasi and the KGB were needed? Say they're wrong. Sure. Go for it. It's kind of a pointless statement in my opinion, but sure. I don't want to repeat the Stasi and the KGB in the future. I don't think they should exist. But, acknowledge them within their historical context. Because otherwise you're getting a wrong idea of history where you just think, the world is run like a comic book. You have comic book villains like Stalin, then you have comic book heroes like the United States military and NATO. And it's like, no, that's not how the world works. Things are much more complex than that. Which is what is so great about Marxism and the, historical materialism is you see what really brings about change in society, and how changes in production and struggles between massive groups of people are what bring about change, not just one person running things at the top, which is this, liberal great man of history fallacy, which rots kids' brains. It's just not based in reality at all, and it's sad. It's honestly sad to see that that's what children would be watching and getting their idea of the Cold War from that. But that's why we're here to combat it, baby, with dialectical and historical materialism. Didn't Stalin try to resign? Yes, but he continually was elected because he was a hero, and now he's still got 75% support in the country despite a massive effort from the West to discredit and throw dirt on Stalin's name, and a massive effort from Khrushchev, within Stalin's country. But people don't like Khrushchev. Khrushchev was deposed. Is not a hero to the Russians today like Stalin is. I followed you on TikTok today, I think. Thank you. Is it MidwesternMarks.com? That'd be me. Communism is morally neutral at worst. Yeah, I mean, I think morality mostly is just a form of communication. Right? Morality is a way to say, this is something I like and approve of, or this is something I don't. This is something that I think is beneficial to me in society versus this is something, that I don't. If you have everyone's going to have their own personal morality. You have to have your own personal morality, but, I don't think it necessarily has a place in analyzing history. You can support stuff, say this is ultimately good for human flourishing or whatever. But, to place moral judgments on historical figures when you're giving an objective view of something like the Cold War, I don't know. I mean, I guess I do. I support the Soviet Union, but I support them not, just because I think they were morally doing all the right things. Although I guess I do, supporting human flourishing is and teaching people to read and feeding them is in line with my morality. But mostly it's because of the success of their economy in doing those things, and the rational plans that they were able to carry out and showing that, socialism is superior to capitalism as a system. I guess it does stem from personal morality in some sense. I don't know. We're getting into a really deep philosophical debate or a conversation if we go down that rabbit hole. But since we're doing it, let me pull up a video or send y'all a video that I would recommend checking out. Have you read Black Shirts and Reds by Parenti? Only like 12 times. Actually, this is the most entertaining video, The Problem with Sam Harris's Morality by Dr. Hans Moeller. I'm not going to react to it right now, because if I do that, I'm going to want Carlos with me. But just check that out at some point, and check out his other videos on morality as well. Ooh, we got another PragerU video, and then we got another TikTok. Okay, let's check out that. Guys, Putin brought back the USSR, and they've infiltrated the State Department. Okay. JK, get McCarthy. Send this to your friends and McCarthy that. That's funny. The USSR 2.0. We'll get it eventually. Oh, shoot. I forgot to turn the screen around again, didn't I? Or did I not? I don't know. Sorry. If I did. Alright. Hey, Eddie, here's a video that features Dennis Prager himself trying to prove that communism isn't moral. He goes on to cite the infamously debunked Black Book of Communism. Cites death of victims of communism. This video needs to be debunked. Okay, we'll check her out. It does sound like it could be ripe for critiquing. We've been doing a lot of PragerU videos, but they're so easy to go after. PragerU made a video responding to me once. It was like I was saying that various industries need to be nationalized and their surplus needs to be reinvested in, you know, developing infrastructure and helping people. And PragerU, one of their commentators, responded to that and said, yeah, all our industries should be nationalized so they can all work like the DMV. You know, that's what I would want, because the DMV is so good. Like, the DMV is not an industry, it's a public service. You know, the DMV isn't even that bad. In some places, in big cities, it's pretty bad. But it's mostly bad because it's underfunded. You know, and if you nationalize various industries, you could reinvest the money made in those industries into, you know, public services like the DMV to provide more efficient and more widely available public services for people. Like, that's the whole point of nationalizing industry, and that's why you can't even remotely compare industry to the DMV, you know, even though PragerU seem like the kind of people who would tell you to study economics. But apparently they never had an economics course that explained the difference between the Department of Motor Vehicles and the oil industry.
Motives are much less important than behavior. We all know this. If someone has good intentions but treats people badly, those good intentions mean nothing. As it is with individuals, so it is with governments. Capitalism might sound less noble than communism. The individual pursues success to the best of his abilities. That's capitalism. Versus everyone shares everything equally. That's communism.
That's not communism. Communism is a society where you truly get out what you put in. You know, and, you know, I guess there's different theories of what the communist ethic is exactly, you know, but it's mostly like my labor. I know when I go to work every day that I'm contributing to the community and to the people around me, and that my labor is going to create commodities or create a surplus, create value that is going to help me flourish and help my community flourish, and my job is valuable to the community. That's socialism, organizing things rationally so that everybody is contributing to society and doesn't feel isn't being alienated and exploited by people who don't work. But it's definitely not everyone shares equally. You know, socialism at first, you know, about, or the first step in socialism is increasing the productive forces, is bringing about construction, industrializing agriculture in places that still have peasant or feudal economies, increasing the amount that these societies can produce, especially in societies that have been subjected to imperialism and prevented from increasing their productive forces, so that everybody can live, in a sort of material abundance or with their means of subsistence met. Because, we have the ability and the technology to produce that much. But again, that's not everyone shares everything equally. In the Soviet Union, they had a distribution of like 10 to 1. The richest people would make like 10 times more than the poorest people, and the richest people were like doctors, scientists, things like that. We're not saying people who contribute greatly to society shouldn't be, get more back from society materially, I guess. I don't know exactly what a communist society is going to look like in the future. But it's not going to be just everyone sharing everything exactly equally. It's just organizing production more rationally than capitalism. And yeah, we'll move on for now.
But it is capitalism that has produced freedom, and it alone has lifted millions from poverty, while communism has kept millions impoverished and, without exception, crushed.
Remember when we were reviewing the last video and I said all the capitalist talking points about communism are just projection? Here we go again. Communism has produced freedom and has lifted millions of people out of poverty. Literally. The first 10 years of China were the fastest increase in life expectancy ever seen in human history, and now they've abolished relative poverty. As, the US, the richest country on earth, poverty rates are increasing. Capitalism is putting more people in poverty, even in the wealthiest country on earth. Whereas China has now abolished relative poverty, but, of course the US has to project. Because Dennis Prager, ultimately, deep down in his chubby little brain, he knows that capitalism keeps millions impoverished. He is one of the imperialist oligarchs. But, in order to justify his behavior and his heinous greed, he has to tell himself this lie every day. He has to wake up and say, capitalism may sound bad, the individual being selfish, but it's actually good. And I'm actually a good person. And I'm being really good by owning a bunch of oil companies and spreading a bunch of right-wing propaganda. I am a good person. And he tricks himself every day into believing this sort of nonsense. I think it's a psychological effect of the modern bourgeoisie. I think a lot of these guys know what they're doing is horrible. And you have like the Koch brothers, who became obsessed with the philosophy of Ayn Rand. And were obsessed with spreading this ideology that greed is good. No matter how untrue it proves itself to be in practice and in reality. The Koch brothers dogmatically spread this doctrine that the free market is the only way. And that, the more greedy you are and the more wealth and capital you accumulate, the more you're doing for society, because you're employing people, and you're expanding production technically. And I think that's a psychological effect of them knowing, like, we just own a giant oil company that our, abusive father gave us. In the case of the Koch brothers. That our father, who like only loved like one of the kids, gave us and left behind. And we know we haven't earned this. We haven't done anything of worth in our lives. We have, a massive amount of wealth. And we own these oil companies in a country where there's homeless people and there's decay. But in order to justify such a heinous situation and such heinous accumulations of wealth and the continuation of accumulating and producing that wealth and exploiting people to make that wealth, they have to convince themselves of these just absurd dogmatic ideologies that almost become like a religion, where they're worshiping, the invisible hand of the market.
Without exception, crushed freedom. Capitalism, for all its imperfections, enables a decent society. Communism, whatever its stated intentions, leads to evil. Yet increasingly, people either ignore.
Remember when I was talking about how morality is just a form of communication? Right? Everybody can have their personal morality, but ultimately saying something's good or something's bad isn't a material analysis. It's not actually getting to the root of what something is or why something is. You're just saying, I like this or I don't like this. Communism leads to evil. Dennis Prager. I think he just doesn't like communism, y'all.
Ignore or deny the evil of this ideology, which within a period of only 60 years created modern totalitarianism and deprived more people of human rights and tortured and killed more people than any ideology in history.
No, Hannah Arendt invented modern totalitarianism with funding from the CIA and the Congress for Cultural Freedom.
How can we explain this? There are two ways. One is ignorance. People just don't know the truth about communism. The second is willful blindness. People know the truth, but choose to ignore it because the truth about communism's horrors is too painful to confront.
Nope, it's not that people just like communism. It's just that people are too dumb or not as brave as Dennis Prager, and they can't confront it. If only, I don't know.
Front. Given the sad state of our educational system, we can assume most people fall into the first category. They just don't know. So let me offer some facts. But before I do, I need to address another question. Why is it important that everyone know what communism did? Here are three reasons. First, we have a moral obligation to the victims of communism not to forget them. Just as Americans have a moral obligation to remember the victims of slavery, we have the same obligation.
What about the victims of Iraq and Vietnam and Korea and Operation Condor and the U.S.'s AFRICOM drone program in Africa and Afghanistan? What about the victims of capitalist imperialism? Why do we get to forget them? Those don't matter to you, Dennis? Those were wars to stop the spread of communism that killed millions of people, destroyed infrastructure and farmland, left waterways toxic, destroyed power plants, overthrew democratically elected leaders. But we're supposed to remember the so-called victims of communism, anybody who, died in a communist country, anybody who tripped and fell and hit their head in a communist country. Or, the Black Book of Communism, which I'm sure Dennis Prager's about to cite in like 2 minutes, if that, literally includes people who died fighting the Nazis in World War II as like deaths of Stalin under the Soviet Union or deaths of communism. So, defeating the Nazi army in World War II is considered a death of communism, but it's not a death of capitalism when the U.S. invades Iraq and kills 2 million plus people for oil, or when they invade them in the Gulf War and then sanction them and starve 500 million, or 500,000, not 500 million, 500,000 children. And Madeleine Albright says on 60 Minutes that it's worth it. We can forget about those children, Dennis. Yeah, I don't know. I know a lot of victims of capitalism as well, even in real life, and I'm not gonna forget about them.
To the billion victims of communism, especially the 100 million who were murdered. Second, the best way to prevent an evil from reoccurring is to confront it in all its horror. The fact that many people today, especially young people, mention communism as a viable option for modern society proves they don't know communism's moral record.
Cry about it. This proves that you don't know that morality is a form of communication. And Marx was not a moralist, and he focused on, he just made a material analysis of the economy and a material analysis of the development of human societies throughout history. So, if you're a communist for moral reasons, I mean, it's cool if moral reasons led you to becoming a communist, but there's more reasons than that. There's material reasons to be a communist as well. But I mean, ultimately, it's largely driven by morality, right? You're driven by the desire to help and make life better for people. But it's also in your own interest, right? It's also in your own interest. So it's also selfish, as a working class person to advocate communism, which is what Marx is getting at. He's saying, look, the mass of people, it's in their interest to take over their exploiters and implement a more rational system where they're producing for themselves. So, it's not necessarily a moral statement. But, also, we do know communism's moral record. The kids these days know communism's moral record. They know what socialist construction has brought about in China with poverty alleviation and bringing an end to famines, and the literacy programs, and Cuba's universal health care and their lung vaccine, and we could go on and on about the successes of communism. But we do know its moral record. We know it better than you, Dennis, which is why I keep making these videos reacting to you, because you're dumb.
Therefore, they do not properly fear communism, which means this evil could happen again. And why could it happen again? That brings us to reason number 3. The leaders of communist regimes and the vast number of people who helped those leaders torture, enslave, and murder were nearly all normal people. Of course, some were psychopaths, but most were not, which means that any society, including free ones, can devolve into communism or some analogous evil. Now some facts, based on the authoritative Black Book of Communism, written by 6...
The authoritative Black Book of Communism. It's been dismissed by, even liberal scholars. Even liberal scholars who are honest have said, the Black Book of Communism is trash. And conservative scholars, too. Anybody who's intellectually honest knows that the Black Book of Communism is not correct. Counts deaths of Stalin and the USSR, or they at least know that it's, using statistics in a way that's dishonest to portray a certain narrative to an absurd extent. Where you're counting, Soviet people who died fighting the Nazis as deaths of communism, as victims of communism. This is absurd, which is why it's been dismissed by so many academics. But according to Dennis, it's authoritative, because he has to throw an appeal to authority fallacy in there. He just has to, fit as much nonsense into his videos as he can.
French scholars, and published in the United States by Harvard University Press. Here are the numbers of people murdered by communist regimes, not soldiers, ordinary civilians. Vietnam, 1 million. Eastern Europe, 1 million.
Eastern Europe. Communism killed 1 million people in Vietnam? What about the Vietnam War, which killed 2 million civilians? And over 1 million Vietnamese fighters, Viet Minh. And 200 to 250,000 South Vietnamese, the US's, proxy fighters that they were funding. And, this doesn't even mention all the infrastructure and farmland that was destroyed, just the ignorant death and destruction, of productive forces and of human life that's brought about by capitalist imperialism and these horrific bombing campaigns. And Vietnam was admittedly a war to stop the spread of communism. But freaking wealthy, fat cat capitalists, Oompa Loompa ass Dennis Prager is going to sit here and say that communism killed 1 million people in Vietnam, so that's why communism's wrong? Dog. It's like you're purposefully saying the dumbest stuff you can. But I know that you think this is a real argument because your brain's literally made of marshmallows, and you think working people are stupid. You think people like us are stupid. And when you say that communism killed 1 million people in Vietnam, you think we're going to go, oh, really? Oh, well then I guess I'm going to stop advocating for universal healthcare if communism killed 1 million people in Vietnam, huh? No, dummy. We know what you guys did in the Vietnam War. We know that Ho Chi Minh was trying to bring about construction and bring his people out of poverty, and you guys bombed the shit out of him for it. We're not dumb. We're not the generation who was indoctrinated with McCarthyism. We are onto you people.
Civilians. Vietnam, 1 million. Eastern Europe, 1 million. Ethiopia, 1.5 million. North Korea, 2 million. Cambodia, 2 million.
In the Korean War, admittedly, U.S. Air Force General Curtis LeMay said the U.S. killed 20% of their population. 20% of their population. And then has held them under the most stringent economic embargo in the world ever since. Not to mention Cambodia, where Anthony Bourdain said, once you've been to Cambodia, you will never stop wanting to beat Henry Kissinger to death with your bare hands again, because you will learn what Henry Kissinger did to Cambodia with his bombing campaigns during the Vietnam War, destroying this country with bombs, killing millions of civilians. And you're going to sit here and say communism killed them. The arrogance of these imperialists. These people are disgusting liars. And yes, that is a moral statement. I understand that morality is a form of communication, and I'm communicating to Dennis Prager the fact that he sucks ass.
The Soviet Union, 20 million. China, 65 million. And the numbers are conservative. And of course, these numbers do not describe the suffering endured by hundreds of millions of people who were not murdered. The systematic stripping people of their right to speak freely, to worship freely, to start a business, or even to travel without party permission. No non-communist judiciary or media.
Is this why the U.S. supports Saudi Arabia? You know, so you have the ability to speak freely and worship freely and, you know, have a free judiciary. That's definitely not, you know, basically a fundamentalist state where you have to worship the state religion or you're risking death. You know, ignore them though. They're capitalists, yeah, but they give us a lot of oil, so, you know, it's cool. Who are they even really hurting anyways? Please don't look at Yemen, the worst humanitarian crisis in the world, where the Saudis are bombing their water sanitation facilities with U.S. Or with jets that the U.S. are fueling and helping to pay for.
The poverty of nearly all communist countries, the imprisonment of vast numbers of people, and of course, the trauma suffered by the hundreds of millions of friends and relatives of the murdered and imprisoned. These numbers don't tell you about the frozen millions in the vast Soviet...
It's weird because I know a lot of people in the U.S. military who got deployed and now have, you know, deal with a lot of trauma now that they're back, and they get no freaking help from the military that sent them over there to get this trauma. You know, and they recognize that what they were fighting for wasn't what they thought they were fighting for. And, you know, I also know the effect that it has on the families and the friends. So, yeah, it's capitalist
Siberian
projection. And like I said, it's kind of sick because Dennis Prager knows he's an imperialist, right? He knows he's done these things and lobbied for these things and benefited greatly from these things. But he's just projecting it all onto communism. You know, think of all the trauma of the families. Yeah, think of all the trauma of the families in the DPRK. You know, you killed 20% of North Korea's population. That's 1 in every 5 people. 1 person in every family of 5 who's dealing with the trauma of losing a loved one. But that's not a war of capitalism, even though it was, you know, perpetrated to stop the spread of communism and allowed transnational corporations to control markets in Korea. It's okay, though, because capitalism's morally good. Dennis Prager said so.
Prison camp system known as the Gulag Archipelago, or the Vietnamese communists' routine practice of burying peasants alive to terrorize other peasants into supporting the communists, or Mao Zedong's regular use of hideous tortures to punish opponents and intimidate peasants.
What about the United States' use of torture? When they tortured people and said, "Tell us that Saddam Hussein has weapons of mass destruction." The people said, "Huh?" And they said, "Tell us that Saddam Hussein has weapons of mass destruction," and then waterboarded them and electrocuted them in Abu Ghraib and committed committed crimes, like sexual crimes against these people to get them to go against, you know, their religious values and their religious beliefs as a form of torture. And then he used what they got from those people, the supposed confessions they got from those people, to say that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction when they didn't invade Iraq and kill millions of people. That's okay. Why don't you criticize that, Dennis? You know where that happened? In the greatest, freest capitalist country of the world. The USA did that. But that's okay. Because, as he said, communism's morally evil. You know, and we should base our governments and our systems, and our economic systems off of the morality of Dennis Prager. This really, really creepy looking rich dude who makes a lot of YouTube videos about why he's a really good person and poor people who want communism are just stupid and not quite as smart as him.
People associate evil with darkness, but that's not accurate. It is easy to look into the dark. It is very hard to stare into bright light. One should therefore associate...
It's very hard to stare at your weird rooster chin. Dennis, you are literally one of the weirdest looking people I've ever seen in my life. You look like you haven't been outside in 50 years. You look like you haven't done physical activity since 1983. You are a gross, gross person.
Evil with extreme bright.
You look like a plum that got all the color and juice sucked out of it. Now you're just like a shriveled up white plum, like a white prune.
Brightness, given that people rarely look at real evil. And those who do not confront real evil often make up evils, like systemic racism in 21st century America, or toxic masculinity, or patriarchy, that are much easier to confront. The book of Psalms states, those of you who love God must hate evil. If you don't believe in God, here's another way of putting it. Those of you who love people must hate evil.
Someone in my family went to watch Dennis Prager talk one time. They posted it on Facebook. I was like, no. Like, imagine hearing this and thinking this is smart. Oops. He named all these places like Cambodia and Vietnam and Korea where the U.S. has killed, multiple millions of people. And these stats are easily, looked up. And says that in these places, communism killed people. And then his reasoning for communism being bad and why the U.S. is justified in doing all these things is that communism is evil. He just sets up a moral framework of communism evil, capitalism good. Like, come on, who's listening to this and being like, this is smart? Capitalism good? I never thought about it that way. Communism evil? Yes. Oh, a Bible verse that says evil bad? Wow, like, we need to fight the spread of communism with everything we have. It's just, on an intellectual level, it's like dribble. Like, toddlers have the critical thinking skills to look through this. Like, it just shows how dumb Dennis Prager and his writers actually are. That this is the propaganda they come up with. Like, these are some dumb bourgeois dudes. These are some dudes who have never had to work for anything in their lives or ever have to even use their brains or think about anything in their lives. And now they're trying to make propaganda and it just comes out like this.
If you don't hate communism, you don't care about, much less love, people. I'm Dennis Prager. Thank you for watching this video. To keep PragerU videos.
Dennis Prager, such a loving person. I want to be just like him. Bizarre. Just bizarre stuff, folks. Punishing and imprisoning the poor is distinctly American response to poverty in the 21st century. Workers who cannot pay their debts, mass incarceration is used to make social problems temporarily invisible and to create the mirage of something having been done. Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Don't forget that Dennis Prager intentionally contracted COVID to prove that he could beat it. No way. I feel like that has to be made up. I agree it's a pretty bad video, but it doesn't highlight the best parts of capitalism and the U.S. Our foreign affairs can be debated, but our internal successes are much harder to question. I mean, you don't question it all, though, like the last 40 years of neoliberalism that's seen most of the Midwest deindustrialized, and that's seen much of the social safety net that used to exist because workers fought for it dismantled. I think the last 40 years, if capitalism's entire history hasn't shown that Marx and Lenin's analysis of it is correct, and it always, morphs into wealth accumulating at the top in capitalist imperialism. I mean, all of history has shown that. But the last 40 years especially, since Reagan and Margaret Thatcher and the introduction of neoliberalism and, this ideology of trickle-down economics, which the CIA and U.S. has tried to enforce in Latin America via torture and overthrowing various governments, which is a product of capitalism, right? Capitalism is capitalist transnational firms are the ones, who are driving U.S. foreign affairs via lobbying and, campaign donations and whatever other methods. But also, even in the home country, we have more empty houses than we have homeless people. But we can't house them, even though we have a massively wealthy class of real estate oligarchs, people who own land. Because heaven forbid we infringe on their profits in order to house homeless people. And like I said, we've seen the Midwest deindustrialize, which is why much of the Midwest went for Trump when he said he was going to bring jobs back. We've seen much of our economy morph into just a service-based economy. And you have companies like Uber and Lyft and these other service economies who aren't even letting their workers be full-time employees. They're having them registered as private contractors so that they're disarticulating labor and preventing people from organizing and combining into unions or other organs of worker power. I mean, capitalism has only, as we've allowed it as we've deregulated capitalism and as we've taken away the social safety net and different protections and organs of worker power and organs of that allow the workers to wage a class struggle in their favor, as these things have been dismantled, conditions for the workers have gotten worse because capitalism has made them worse. While a small group of people at the top has continued to accumulate more and more and get richer. I mean, it's just obvious. Meanwhile, China has alleviated poverty and they're in 0 wars, and they're the fastest growing economy in the world. They're gonna overtake the U.S. as the biggest economy in the world soon. They've alleviated poverty, and in 1949, before the Communist Revolution, they were literally a backwards feudal country. They didn't have tractors. They had peasants. And people died of famine all the time. And now they're this industrial superpower. Like, socialism has really, really showed its superiority over the past 20 years to anyone who's been paying attention and tuning out just the nonsense from the U.S. media. Check this out real quick. All right, unelectable airwaves, I got you. Jen Psaki. She back?
No, we are not advocating for killing the leader of a foreign country or regime change. That is not the policy of the United States.
Oh yeah, that's what I call a Psaki bomb, baby. Jean-Bertrand Aristide, someone who was overthrown twice by the United States. He was so base they threw him out twice.
What you gonna do when I come through with that What you gonna do when I come through with that
Not to mention, she's talking about Russia, right? She's saying that's not the policy of the United States. I'm 99% sure she was talking about Russia there, and saying Russia's going to invade Ukraine. Russia's goal isn't to overthrow the government of Ukraine. And their goal is mostly to bring peace and stability to eastern Ukraine and the Donbass region and get rid of these Nazi militias who NATO's been funding, and, also stop NATO's expansion towards their borders and sort of, use this as a way to tell the U.S. that we're not going to take this anymore. But the U.S., part of the reason that Russia's done that is because the U.S. overthrew the Ukrainian government in 2014. Victoria Nuland, the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, said, in a talk that the U.S. was funneling millions and millions of dollars into Ukraine, which is filled with Western-backed NGOs, and everybody knows this, in order to overthrow a leader who was more sympathetic to Russians and Russian speakers and was going to take Stefan Bandera, the Nazi, off of Ukraine's list of national heroes, and was going to protect the Russian language, protect Russian speakers. That's who the U.S. overthrew. Via funneling tons of money into NGOs, and, there were various tactics. Everybody should watch the movie Ukraine on Fire, which details it in incredible detail. Incredible movie, especially, in hindsight, knowing that the war in Ukraine has gone down like it has. But, for Jen Psaki to be like, that's not the policy of the U.S. We are not big and bad and evil like Putin. We have never overthrown a government since 2014 when we overthrew Ukraine to try and overthrow Putin. Like, it's all projection. Imperialism is just a whole bunch of projection. Have you ever read Washington Bullets? That's one of those books that I've read like 100 times, and that I've read, that I go back to all the time, because when I'm making TikToks or other videos, I have to cite it, because there's so much information in it. Here's a video from Armchair Historian about the Cuban Missile Crisis. I might have actually watched that before. You've seen a video of Dennis Prager saying he intentionally caught COVID? Oh my, okay, let's watch this. It's short.
Iowa homeowners, if you have a power meter like this on the side of your house, you can qualify to erase your energy bill at no.
If you have been doing everything you can to avoid getting COVID, you will find this baffling. 73-year-old conservative radio host Dennis Prager says he got the disease on purpose. First, he poo-pooed the vaccine. Then he said he hugged thousands of people in hopes of contracting the virus. As Stephen Fabian reports, he got his wish.
A stunning admission today from famed conservative radio host Dennis Prager. He's battling COVID and says he got it on purpose.
I have COVID.
Instead of protecting himself from COVID, 73-year-old Prager says he went out of his way to catch it.
I engaged with strangers, constantly hugging them, taking photos with them, knowing that I was making myself very susceptible to getting COVID, which is indeed, as bizarre as it sounded, what I wanted.
Prager was seen coughing during the broadcast from...
I mean, I think ultimately they did say that everyone's going to get it, right? That eventually everyone's going to get it, and the vaccine lessens your symptoms and stuff, so that's a reason to get the vaccine. It makes it less impactful when you do get it. But the main thing I take away from this is, like, a poor person couldn't do this. Like, poor people were freaking out because there's so many people in the U.S. who don't have health care. Or there's so many people who know they can't afford to go to the hospital and get treated if they get this. You know, and maybe, you know, they're worried that they're not going to be able to make it through, versus Dennis Prager's is like, oh, I'll just get it now. You know, I have the best healthcare in the world. Like Donald Trump got airlifted to that, you know, that incredible military hospital, the most high-end hospital in the country, because he has the wealth and power to do that. And it shows that, you know, when we have these medical emergencies or these pandemics like COVID, there's always a class nature to it. You know, it always affects the working class more. Every sort of disaster does. Yeah. Someone says, do you think it's ethical to take private property and distribute it to someone else? It depends on the private property. You talking about Dennis Prager's oil companies or whatever it is he owns, or the Koch brothers oil companies? Yes. We should definitely take that and not distribute it to other people, but expand production and start moving to renewables also, but mostly expand energy production, so that we can reinvest the surplus that's produced by those companies into developing our economy as a whole, and into developing the masses, bringing the masses out of poverty. Or health insurance companies are a great example. Health insurance companies are literally just a middleman in between you and your healthcare. They serve no purpose. I'm a healthcare administration, getting a master's degree in healthcare administration right now. Let me tell you what, the insurance companies don't even do anything. They just charge you and then try and pay for as little of your healthcare as they can. They have nothing to do with healthcare, and in fact, they make healthcare more fragmented. Because hospitals and doctors' offices, although there are many, 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 many problems with those being for profit, you know, more problems than people think, largely they want to work together because they have the technology now to work together and communicate and use telecommunication. But they can't, because everybody is connected to a certain insurance industry, and there's like 17 different insurance companies. They don't let the hospitals work together. Yes, it is absolutely ethical to take those and distribute them to the people, nationalize them, and create a national health service similar to what the UK has. That would be more than ethical. That would be really awesome. What was the other video I was going to watch? Ukrainian boxer holds Nazi flag while accepting medal. I bet you, it's either, it's probably Klitschko. Klitschko was the heavyweight champ, and then he's like literally like a serious player in Ukrainian politics. Like, he has so much support with the people because he's a sports star, that he's like, been this right-wing leader of a political party in Ukraine.
So
he's
we've
like a
showed
serious
you
player. But there's also Vasily Lomachenko, who, they've just been posting videos of him like holding guns, and they're like, Lomachenko's going to war. He's going to fight the Russians. I doubt he's actually in combat, but he's been supporting the war effort like that. I know a Ukrainian wrestler, and he's supported the war effort in similar ways. I don't blame him for doing that, and I know a lot of them are under a lot of pressure to publicly support it. Same with like Cuban athletes who leave. They'll constantly be under pressure to like trash Cuba, trash their home country publicly, especially when the US is trying to do regime change, like with the SOS Cuba color revolution attempt. All the Cuban athletes were being pressured to say, oh, I hope the US brings freedom to Cuba and overthrows their government. So yeah, but I bet you this is Klitschko. We'll see though.
That it's not Russian propaganda that the Ukrainians are hooked up with Nazis. It's for real, and everybody used to talk about it until this war, and everybody pretends they're just ultra-nationalists or something like that. Are there really neo-Nazis fighting for Ukraine? Well, yes, but it's a long story. That's what they say. Winning hearts in the PR war, Ukrainians has a Nazi problem that NATO and USA do not talk about. Okay, so that's all real. And then there they are. There's the Ukraine, and they're holding a Ukrainian flag with a Nazi symbol on it. And then even here's Ro Khanna, a guy who now backtracks on these words. He was telling the truth a few years ago when he said ever since the Orange Revolution began under President Bush, the United States has been...
Oh, man, I should have talked about this, too. This one was sad. Because I've met Ro Khanna, and he was like someone who I looked up to and thought was one of the good politicians. And he literally switched his position on Ukraine. He was talking about how the U.S. was supporting a neo-Nazi coup. And then now he's like denying that there's a Nazi problem in Ukraine. It's like, you have no principles. You're disgusting. It's because he, is a politician, like a Silicon Valley area. So he has to, not piss off these like liberal tech overlords who have tons of influence in the area where he's a politician.
Been complicit in the rehabilitation and spread of neo-Nazis in Ukraine. Enough is enough, he says. Our government must stand up to the Azov Battalion and other fascist groups. He then went on to vote yay and vote funding those Nazis with $40 billion because Ro Khanna has just as much integrity as any other politician. Okay, and so why do I tell you all this? Because this woman here won a silver medal boxing for Ukraine.
Oh, I should have known it wasn't Klitschko if they were accepting a medal. Because Klitschko is a professional boxer, obviously the heavyweight champ, versus, the Olympics where you would receive a medal, or, like the world championships are amateur boxing usually, where they wear a headgear, and it's a little bit more like point fighting. But yeah, it's really, the ideology is pertinent in Ukraine. Like I said, Klitschko, this heavyweight champ, one of the most famous boxers in the world, is part of a right-wing political party who, isn't a neo-Nazi party, but they're complicit in it. They lean more towards the Nazis than they do towards any kind of socialists or communists, which are now banned, in Ukraine. So yeah, it's not surprising to see this. And Ukraine's got a long history of combat sports, right? And it's like, combat sports people are kind of rough. They're probably not going to fall into liberalism, right? They're either going to fall into communism like me, or they're going to fall into this, especially if they're in Ukraine.
Her name is Diana Petrenko. She took second place, and she raises the flag. You want to see the flag she raises? Here we go. Oh, she got a Nazi flag. She got a Nazi flag.
Now, can you make it out behind the wolf's angle, the black sun? But I guess that was too black for them, so they turned it white.
They turned it white, yeah. Behind it is that thing, but that's it.
Wow.
There it is, and she doesn't even want to put it down to shake her hand. She wants.
And they just let this go on. Like, if they pulled out a swastika, I'm sure people wouldn't do that. This represents the same ideology, literally. Like, they literally have based themselves on Stefan Bandera and Hitler. Yeah, I wonder what if I held up, like, the Soviet Union's flag. I should do that next time I get into war. Just hold up, the hammer and sickle. See if they take it away from me. I guarantee they will.
To keep holding that Nazi thing. And they told her, don't you drop it for anything. Isn't that wild? That she's just allowed to bring a Nazi flag? Oh, she's going to say something to her?
She said, can you put that away, please?
That's funny. That the capitalist guy Warfront in the chat. His response is, "What are you on? LOL. You have some of best private sector tech and medical companies." Yeah, that's what I said. I said that they have the private sector technology to communicate with each other. These medical companies do. But the insurance industry won't let them. They're fragmenting the system and stopping them from communicating as cohesively as they could. You didn't respond to anything I said. What are you on? I'm on my healthcare administration master's program. It's given me a better grasp of the American healthcare system than you, apparently.
Oh, she did tell her to put it away. It's actually kind of fitting for her to fly the Azov flag since she took second place. Am I right? Because the Nazis came in second in World War II.
What would Vince Lombardi say about that?
That's a good joke.
Here's another response that says, didn't get the memo to remove the black sun. Azov Battalion troops, so there it is. They dropped their neo-Nazi symbol, and of course, exploited by Russian propaganda. So that's how they spin it. Oh, well, we got to get rid of our Nazi symbols. Why? Because the Russian propagandists are exploiting it.
This was one of the funniest articles. Warfront was responding to someone else. Okay, I got you. I'm sorry. The Azov Battalion drops neo-Nazi symbol exploited by Russian propagandists. Those darn Russian propagandists sharing the fact that the U.S. is dumping millions of dollars into neo-Nazi groups as gas prices go through the roof here and our civilians suffer. Darn Russian propagandists talking about obvious truths. Alright, I'm gonna watch another one of these oversimplified videos because I think that's gonna make for a good YouTube. Not only the first one that I watched, but I'm sure all of their videos are equally as bad.
This video.
So I'm gonna find something that I know about, but first I gotta go to the bathroom. So, I'm gonna play a video of myself wrestling like I always do. I lost this match, but this guy's really good. So this is what it looks like when I wrestle someone who's bigger and better than me. I would like to wrestle this guy again. I feel like I've gotten better since this, but this is a guy who trains Greco full time. The style of wrestling we're doing is Greco, and this guy trained full time, and I didn't at this time. So there you go. You can watch me lose. Woohoo! He's whooping my ass already. It's only 2 minutes in. What am I doing? Down 4-0? All right, let's see. What do I know a lot about? Wow, we gained followers while I was gone. Maybe I should gain viewers. Maybe I should just leave. The American Civil War. Actually, I don't know a ton about these. Oh, thank you for the follow. Woohoo! Follow. I know a bit about the Falklands. Oversimplified World War I. I don't know. Actually, these aren't as good as I thought. How do those guys have so many subscribers? Jeez, they gotta be astroturfed, like boosted by the NED and by the State Department. Holy crap. They have like 6 million subscribers and they only have like 20 videos. And they all have absurd views. If that don't show that the State Department is manipulating algorithms, I don't know what does. Let's do... Gosh, now I'm going to get recommended a bunch of conservative videos. Let's watch. This is what I made a TikTok about today. About Scott Walker, who was ultimately the reason I originally started getting into socialist politics, because he abolished got rid of the teachers unions and abolished collective bargaining rights in Wisconsin, and gave the teachers a pay cut and said it was to fix the debt, and then turned around and gave billions of dollars to the Foxconn Corporation, this multinational corporation, and now Wisconsin's debt is $23.33 billion. So he did not fix the debt. All he did was take money away from a bunch of teachers, like my dad and a lot of my friends' parents. So shout out to Scott Walker. Great job fixing the debt. You didn't fix the debt. You just made people more poor, because that's what capitalism does. And he was funded heavily by the Koch brothers also.
So Governor Walker pours gasoline on the Act 10 fire in Madison. That's right.
Yeah, I don't know what this is. I thought it was an interview with Walker. Well, whatever. I'm glad I got to rant about him again.
Was at Beijing.
Head out. Sorry, my speaker was off. Anyone else got any videos they want me to react to before I head out? Anything really good? Or really short? I'm pretty tired, honestly. I'm about to fall asleep. This video, My Life in East Germany, react to the first 2 minutes. Let's do that later. Let's do that another time, because that actually sounds interesting. So I'd like to look through that a bit and spend some time talking about that when I'm not tired. Nah, bro, have a good night. Get some rest. All right. I will. Well, let's look at what this is. I will get some rest. But what is this? Identity socialism? What is PragerU doing? What are they ever doing? What are they on? Let's watch.
There's a new socialism in town. I call it identity socialism.
I would recognize that voice and nonsensical argument anywhere. It's Dinesh D'Souza. Arr. Dinesh D'Souza first came onto my radar after the hurricane that hit Puerto Rico, because I had spent some time in Puerto Rico, built a house for a lady there who didn't have housing. So when the hurricane hit Puerto Rico, I was very concerned, messaged a lot of my friends in Puerto Rico to make sure that they were all right. Was very concerned about, the people there who struggled to have housing, and like the people that we met, or like the woman that we met and built a house for. Worried about them after this hurricane had hit the small island, how many houses were destroyed and how much it would take to rebuild that. Because obviously it's difficult to build housing and I saw that firsthand. Saw firsthand the lack of housing in Puerto Rico. But after that, Trump refused to really give any aid to Puerto Rico, and Dinesh D'Souza, this guy making this video, said, normally colonies give the master countries resources, wealth, and troops, and labor, or whatever else. What does Puerto Rico give us? Therefore, we shouldn't help them recover from the hurricane. When Puerto Rican civilians do serve in the U.S. Army, and when Puerto Rico is, called a territory so the U.S. can treat it like a colony without calling it a colony, they do exploit the crap out of Puerto Rico's labor, cheap labor, and resources. And that's why it's held as a U.S. territory and not considered a state. But that's why Dinesh D'Souza first came onto my radar. But now he's saying there's a new socialism in town. Identity socialism. Probably not, Dinesh. You probably made this up because you're a moron.
The old socialism, the kind Karl Marx dreamed up, was all about the working class, the sort of blue-collar worker who, ironically, voted for President Trump. But today's socialists could...
True, actually.
Couldn't care less about the guy in the hard hat. He had his chance at revolution and blew it. Today's socialist is all about race, gender, and transgender rights. Class is an afterthought.
I think this is just wishful thinking. I think this is just wishful thinking from the PragerU folks. None of the socialists actually want to come after the capitalists anymore. Us. Right? You guys only care about race, gender, and whatever else, social issues now. Right? Like, oh no, we do care about, emancipation for all people and but we understand that is inextricably intertwined with the class struggle. And you can't have any real emancipation for women or for minority groups until you overthrow the ruling class who are exploiting them and the capitalist system that exploits them as well. But yeah, I think it's just, they're like, Marxism has morphed into liberalism, right? And you're going to stop coming for our wealth and the means of production now, right?
Understand this is to understand the left's takeover of the college campus and all the ills that takeover has spawned, from Me Too to Black Lives Matter to girls competing against biological boys. But campus culture has now metastasized into the culture of the whole society. As liberal writer Andrew Sullivan has put it, we all live on campus now. Identity socialism is first and foremost about division, not just class division, but now race division, gender division, transgender division. Blacks and Latinos are in, whites are out, women are in, men are out, gays, bisexuals, transsexuals, transgenders are in, heterosexuals are out, illegals are in, native-born citizens are out. One may think this is all part of the politics of inclusion, but to think that is to get only half the picture. The point for the left is not merely to include, but also to exclude. So where did this identity socialism come from? Meet Herbert Marcuse. Born in Berlin.
This is just liberalism. I mean, he's giving a fairly good, Marxism, starting with Marcuse, who was funded by, the Congress for Cultural Freedom and indirectly supported by the CIA, or even directly supported by the CIA and U.S. State Department, started going away from the traditional class analysis of Marxism, started saying, we don't need to look at class, we just need to focus more on racial and gender struggles, and struggles for minority groups, rather than seeing those, the way communists had always seen them, as struggles that are intertwined with the class struggle and the struggle to overthrow the ruling bourgeoisie, the exploiting class. So what Dinesh D'Souza is saying here isn't, inherently wrong, even though obviously I would disagree with certain things that he said about, the Black Lives Matter movement and whatever else. I think he's probably got, bigoted views in a lot of those areas. But what he's saying here, ultimately, with the move towards identity politics rather than actual class analysis is true, and it's something that's been supported by the State Department. But then, the other side of that coin is then the conservatives, can use that too. They can say this is the left and this is evil, and they can push people towards reactionary, bigoted or hateful social views, or just, anti-PC culture even, just saying all of this is stupid, and keep people fighting over nonsense, keep people fighting this culture war. right? Like, that's what this whole video is Dinesh D'Souza talking about how, you know, the culture war now is the socialists versus the conservatives. You know, all the socialists have just abandoned the class struggle and have engaged in the culture war, which, you know, in some ways is true. There are a lot of socialists who totally forget class analysis, and you need to really center class in their analysis more. But again, you know, this is very beneficial to the people like Dennis Prager and to the people like Dinesh D'Souza, who can then, you know, attack this sort of liberalism as if it is socialism. And it's very popular too. Finally killed that fly. That sucker's been flying around the whole stream. Let's go.
In 1898, Marcuse fled Germany at the dawn of the Nazi era. After stints at Columbia, Harvard, and Brandeis, Marcuse...
Sorry, someone says, what type of communist are you, Eddie? Marxist-Leninist.
Moved to California, where he joined the University of California at San Diego in 1965. You'd think that living in a paradise like Southern California, with all the comforts and privileges of academic life, might have softened Marcuse's Marx-like hatred of capitalism. But it was not to be. If anything, the more he prospered, the more he wanted to bring the system down.
Yeah, that dude was controlled opposition. And this is just confusing the narrative around Marcuse and, you know, these sort of pseudo-Marxist thinkers, which is the smartest thing the State Department ever did. You know, was start backing a bunch of, like, pseudo-Marxist thinkers to start saying, you know, Marxism isn't class analysis, you know, focus on other stuff. You know, because class is obviously the basis, and we should organize based on class and organize our struggle based on class. But, yeah. I think that's all for today. I'm about to fall asleep. I feel like my brain just isn't firing as quick as I wanted to. But thank you all for bearing with me. We got like 50-some viewers here, so apparently I wasn't too slow today. Obviously I'm getting back into it too. I just been wrestling in Oklahoma for a really long time, so thanks for hanging out. On Parallel Devs, it's the Eddie. Thanks for the stream.